I'd like to welcome all of you to today's session of our spiritual community of practice, spiritual care community of practice, supporting existential reflection and meaning making, part one. Before we get into our presentation, I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge that the land on which I am presenting, the city of Ottawa, is the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. I acknowledge the historical oppression of lands, cultures, and original peoples in what we now know as Canada, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to be present in this territory. Now, briefly, regarding the Palliative Care ECHO Project, it is a 5-year national initiative to cultivate communities of practice and establish continuous professional development among healthcare providers across Canada who are caring for patients with life-limiting illness. We encourage you to check out our website and stay connected with us at www.echopalliative.com. And of course, the Palliative Care ECHO Project is supported by a financial contribution from Health Canada. So the views expressed herein do not necessarily represent the views of Health Canada. Briefly, many of you might know Pallium Canada for our LEAP program. So our LEAP core is an interprofessional course that focuses on the essential competencies to provide a palliative care approach. It is taught by local experts who are experienced palliative care clinicians and educators. And it is now available online as well as in person, accredited both by the CFBC and the Royal College. And we have added a little link in the chat if you'd like to get more information via the Pallium website about our LEAP courses. Today, we are doing the second session in this community of practice. And you can see a little bit of an overview of the upcoming sessions as well, or if you look on our website, you will be able to look at those as well. Please register on our COP, of course, if you're here, most likely you already have, but feel free to also share the link when you come to one of these sessions, invite your peers, the more the merrier. So for the welcome and reminders, I can already see the chat is on fire, so welcome everybody. We are so glad that you are with us today. Your microphones are muted, and there will be a time at the end of the session when you can unmute yourself, put your hand up for questions and discussion. But if you'd like to also add questions in the chat, we will address them at the end of the presentation. Remember not to disclose any personal health information during the session. And of course, the session is being recorded and will be emailed to all registrants within the next week or so. I will go over some of the disclosures right now. So the relationship with our financial sponsors, like I said, we are funded by Health Canada in part. We are a non-for-profit organization, and we also generate funds to support operations and research and development from the sale of our Pallium pocketbook and of course registration fees. So I myself, along with the presenters and the other panelists that are joining us today, do not have any other conflicts to disclose, as you can see on this slide. And of course, the Scientific Planning Committee had complete independent control over the development of the content that you will see in front of you today. So once again, my name is Diana Vince. I'm the Palliative Care ECHO Project Manager here at Pallium Canada, and I will allow everybody in the panel and the presenters to introduce themselves. So go ahead, Sheila, if you'd like to start.
Hi, everybody. I am Sheila Atkinson. My background is that I'm a certified spiritual care practitioner. Because I practice in Ontario, I'm also affiliated with or registered with the College of Registered Psychotherapists of Ontario. And I work currently as a grief support coordinator within Sick Kids Hospital in the pediatric palliative care team, which is called PACT here. And very happy to be sharing and contributing today.
Fantastic. I don't believe that Oceana is with us today, so we'll move on to Christine, if you'd like to just briefly introduce yourself.
All right. Well, good day to everyone from wherever you are, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Christine Enfield. I'm a spiritual health practitioner at the Tertiary Palliative Care Unit at the Grey Nuns Hospital in Edmonton. And I've just been there for 11 years now, this September. So glad to.
Fantastic, and congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Peter, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Sure. I'm Peter Barnes. I live in St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador, and I have a part-time private practice, Spiritual Pathways Associates, and I'm a psychospiritual therapist primarily, and I do volunteer work with the Professional Association, CASC, ACSS, and also with local L'Arche Avalon community. Thank you.
Fantastic. Welcome, Peter. And one of my colleagues is in the background as we are here with you during this session. So I would like to just briefly, before I hand it over to Christine, go over the session learning objectives. So of course, after completing this session, the goal is really for you to be able to use conversational tools to assess spiritual health needs in palliative and bereavement care, and support existential reflection and meaning making. So I'd like to now pass it along to Christine, who will start us off on this presentation.
Thank you very much. So I don't know how many people were here for the previous session, but in the previous session of introduction, Peter spoke about the importance of spiritual assessments in our work as we endeavor to understand and respond to psychospiritual needs of our patients and families. And in that session, he outlined a number of tools for us briefly. And he also emphasized the foundations of any spiritual assessment, and I would say for any therapeutic intervention or interaction that we might have with patients and families. And those two foundational things he mentioned were relationship building and healing presence. So I just want to start as a reminder that I think it's so important for us to make a commitment to growing our own personal capacity in those areas that I mentioned, because that's what truly will make any of these spiritual assessment tools effective. So I encourage you to look back at those slides in those sessions if you just want a reminder, or if you weren't part of that session. Today, what I'm choosing to do is to focus on one tool that has been a helpful frame for me as I listen with intention to someone's story, and with gentle curiosity, assist a person in exploring meaning and suffering in the context of illness. When we talk about, would you do the next slide, please? We're ready for that. So when we talk about existential suffering and questions or reflection, we are in fact talking about spirituality. So here's a useful definition that I often will share with people that I'm talking to about learning more about what is spirituality. And it comes from a consensus conference that took place in 2013. And the definition reads, spirituality is the aspect of humanity that refers to the way individuals seek and express meaning and purpose, and the way they experience their connectedness to the moment, to self, to others, to nature, and to the significant or sacred. So meaning and purpose and connectedness are core concepts that you see in that definition. And I just invite you to just consider on your own, like how would you articulate your own spirituality as you think about that? We will have a range of how much time, interest, or effort that we give to this aspect of ourselves. And this will fluctuate throughout our life. But I think you can sense right away how awareness of spirituality could be heightened at end of life, whether a person would use those terms or not. And we are all spiritual beings. So those points underneath there just emphasize again that because we have this aspect to who we are as a person, we think about things like passion and purpose and what matters most to us. and we wonder about meaning, and we try to make sense of things, hard things and beautiful things that happen to us in our lives. And we are drawn to connection and to relationship. Next slide, please. So this concept of total pain, many of you may be familiar with that, but it's something that we often talk about on our teams. And I really appreciate the work of Cicely Saunders to bring awareness and commitment to best practices to providing multidimensional care for multidimensional pain in dying people. And so all of this brings us to the question, how? How do we understand and treat spiritual pain? How do we engage with people at these heightened times of existential reflection? Next slide, please. That's something out of order here. What did I do there? This quote here is just from Dr. Christina Puchalski. And I think it emphasizes how illness impacts us at the core of who we are as persons. And Dr. Puchalski also reminds us here that there can be a very profound impact as an ill person and a caregiver interact with each other. Next. I've been working as a chaplain or a spiritual health practitioner on the tertiary palliative care unit, as I've said, for 11 years now. And the cliche, the more you know, the more you don't know, I think comes to mind for me. Working with people and coming alongside people in their suffering requires ongoing learning, application, reflection, and adjustment. About 6 years ago, I discovered the programs at Sacred Art of Living Center that is currently located in Oregon in the US. And I found them quite transformational for me on a personal level, but also in my own professional development. So I've completed a number of sessions with them, a number of programs. One of them was Healing the Healers, the Sacred Art of Living and Dying series, and then a 2-year apprenticeship called the Anam Cara or Soul Friend Apprenticeship. So this is where I learned about the spiritual health assessment tool. And the book that's shown there, the American Book of Living and Dying by Groves and Clauser, also outlines the tool, the spiritual assessment tool, and explores in more detail how 4 dimensions of spiritual pain are encountered and engaged with in 9 different cases. So if you're interested in looking further into this, I would certainly recommend that book. So this approach to understanding spiritual pain in the dying draws on wisdom traditions of antiquity that have passed on learning on the sacred art of dying and assisting the dying. And so these wisdom traditions that they drew on include Egyptian, Celtic, Gnostic, Tibetan, and medieval books of the dead. 2 consistent ground rules that were required of the caregiver that were drawn out of these, out of this wisdom and out of some of these documents were ground rules that were required for the caregiver in the art of diagnosing spiritual pain were, first of all, diagnosing pain is about wholly listening rather than compulsive fixing. Diagnosing pain is about wholly listening rather than compulsive fixing. The encouragement here is to trust that at some level, the patient already knows the cause of their spiritual pain. The caregiver's job is to listen deeply and to help the person articulate what might be going on within. This concept connects with one of my grounding images for my spiritual caregiving, and that is that of a reflecting pool. Now, this is not a passive kind of listening, but an active listening that compassionately reflects back to the patient to help them to hear their own voice. So there's no pill or a quick fix here. The second one, spiritual suffering and physical pain are always interrelated. So this is the understanding from the ancients, that in other words, any imbalance of body, mind, and spirit affects the whole organism. And I think more and more we recognize that that this is a true statement. Next slide, please. So this is quite an insightful statement, I think. Just invite you to have a look at that and you can consider how that strikes you, especially that last phrase, when curing is no longer an option, healing is always possible. So yeah, that's one to consider. Like, does that really resonate with you? How have you seen that played out in your relationships with patients and families as you've cared for people that are dealing with a life-limiting illness? Next slide, please. So this is the spiritual health assessment. Not doing very well with my notes here. So taking a spiritual pulse. We don't have to be formally trained in sacred art of dying traditions to begin to diagnose or measure spiritual pain. Cicely Saunders was the one who framed this question that can assist us in taking a spiritual pulse of a patient, so to speak. And the question is simply, how are you within yourself today? How are you within yourself today? We often say, how are you? How are you feeling? People are very accustomed to that question, but I find when I use the question worded this way, and even sometimes I will like make a gesture towards the center of my chest when I say it, how are you within yourself today? You will get quite, I think, a different kind of response maybe than what people just typically go to, which often is the physical, isn't it? So this is a question that Cicely Saunders offers to us. We, as I said, we're accustomed to asking about physical pain and the nature of physical pain. This question and the simple scale underneath can be a way to measure spiritual pain and has been successfully used in both acute care and hospice settings. In your program or clinical context, you may have been including some basic self-assessment in the domains of anxiety and well-being. One that we've used on the TPCU for a long time is called the ESAS-R. So that's one example of a self-assessment tool that would be used on a daily basis. So there are two domains in there of anxiety and well-being. But I think there's a reminder here that if we use these tools and we have access to the information and data in them, to be intentional about noticing what people are actually recording, and then being intentional about gently inquiring about what that means for them and why they are bringing that out or expressing that in that way and how that fits with a more holistic care plan. Next. So the spiritual health assessment tool is a tool for healing through self-awareness. So I will reference this tool for understanding spiritual pain today, and that it was originally developed by Richard and Mary Groves as part of a North American healthcare education initiative to help caregivers and care receivers better understand and respond to the impact of existential suffering on physical health and emotional well-being. It was designed in consultation with physicians, nurse practitioners, mental health therapists, and spiritual caregivers from a wide range of faith and cultural traditions. Underlying the SHA is the concern that Western medicine has no model to help someone live through their suffering. And that might sound like a little bit of a judgment statement, but I don't think it's intended that way. But it's, when you think about it, Western medicine has no model to help someone live through their suffering. In the ancient books of the dead, the experience of spiritual pain is related to one of 4 qualities. And this diagram shows the 4 dimensions of spiritual pain that the tool is based on: meaning versus meaninglessness, relatedness versus disconnection, forgiveness versus unforgiveness, and hope versus hopelessness. So as we take a closer look at this tool, I'll just let you know that there is, like, you can download this form for free from this Sacred Art of Living Center website. And when I draw on this tool, I have not used a form itself with patients or families. This may be something that some of you want to try, particularly. I think this was more often when they did use it as a form was in a hospice setting. And I work in a different kind of environment. So I haven't felt like it was something I just want to give a form out to someone, although you of course, have a whole way that you would do that. But instead, I've taken further study of these 4 dimensions and the scales and the accompanying questions and used them or drawn on them as a framework for listening and asking what has been called open, honest questions that help people to articulate where they are. Next slide, please. So the first one we'll take a look at is meaning pain. And meaning pain involves a crisis of faith or identity at end of life. And struggling with meaning at end of life, we need to remember, is not a pathology. It's not something that's wrong with someone. It is to be expected. It is normal part of our human experience to wrestle with that. Caregivers or companions to the dying can invite courageous questions that may assist with living through the pain and supporting people as they make meaning in the midst of their dying. Questions that might come out of this kind of dimension might be, well, who am I really? Who am I? And why am I here? And how do I make sense of illness and death for myself? What is it that I am still willing to live for? And what is it that I am willing to die for? And by nature, we are meaning makers as human beings. We make both positive and negative meanings of things. And meaning really is about stories that we tell ourselves about why things happen in our lives. So it would be very helpful, I think, to provide a safe and non-judgmental space for someone to reflect on, what story am I telling to myself? What story do I want to tell myself about what is the meaning of my life and what gives my life energy, what gives my life purpose? So a question for reflection, just to focus in on that, might simply be, what gives meaning to your life now? What gives meaning to your life now as you encounter some great changes and losses? Next, please. Next slide. Forgiveness. Oh, sorry, go back. I said it twice. Thank you. Forgiveness pain. Have a look at this. Lack of forgiveness has been referred to as the common cold of the soul. A caution from Richard Groves in some of his teaching was to beware of this place of saying, I can forgive or I can be forgiven of all but that. So when you hear this from yourself or you hear this in another person, I can forgive or be forgiven of everything except for that. It's just kind of like, ooh, just take notice of that. That's significant. So a courageous question there might be, for your own healing, who or what do you need to let go of? For your own healing, who or what do you need to let go of? And sometimes people may find it helpful to even make what could be called as a forgiveness list may be helpful. And that's simply having a piece of paper. One side is who has hurt me and whom have I hurt? And just to make a bit of an inventory. Maybe sometimes we're not even aware what it is that we're holding on to that we may need to look at in order to find a greater sense of healing and reconciliation within ourselves and with others. Next, please. Relatedness pain. So relatedness pain is about what connects us to others, what connects us to the world. Who or what do I most fear losing? Maybe one reflective question for this dimension, this domain. When the connection to that which has brought us harmony and belonging in our lives is broken, we are in pain. When what has brought us connection and a sense of harmony and belonging in our lives, when that is broken, we are in pain. So a question to ask might be, what different form of that relationship is possible for me now? What different form of that relationship is possible for me now? Next. The last of the 4 dimensions is hope pain. Hope is one's resilience in the face of challenge. Now that's a different way of describing it, isn't it? When we think of hope, we often think about the future and what we want for the future, what we hope will happen. But what if we thought of it as hope is one's resilience in the face of challenge? It's a different way of approaching it. What does the future hold for me, though, is a very legitimate question, of course. The process of dying is what some would say is a liminal experience. I don't know if you're familiar with that terminology, but essentially it's saying people are on the threshold. They're not exactly in a place of life and they're not exactly in a place of death, but they're kind of in both at the same time. So it is a place where a reflective lens for a person's soul is greatly needed. Someone who will accompany and hold the questions rather than answer them. In the presence of hopelessness pain, words are rarely effective. And I think on many levels we sense this, and that's what often makes us uncomfortable when people are expressing hopelessness, because we don't know what to say. We would like to move them into a place where they are more resilient and they are in a place of feeling optimistic in some way at that other end of the scale. But it seems words are rarely effective and perhaps not at all what is really needed for someone at this point. So in the work in the study that I did through the center, they suggested that really maybe it's other types of things that can be supportive other than words. And that might be very simple gestures like physical touch, or enhancing the environment with light and beauty, or bringing the sick person in contact with nature. You may have seen the impact that, or with animals, you've seen the impact of that on people who've been feeling very depressed and hopeless in their situation, that those things can really bring some healing to people. But other rituals like lighting a lamp or a candle by the bedside or massaging with scented oil have been reported to alleviate pain. Now, these are not things as practitioners most of the time that we might be doing, but they could be things that we offer or suggest to the family when they don't know what to do to help their loved one who is suffering. Music is another one, and we've got some music therapists on the line here today. And so I'm not a certified music therapist, and most people aren't. although we do find we might utilize music in some ways in our practice and in our work. And so we've been privileged to have a certified music therapist on our unit as long as I've been working there, and that is a tremendous asset for sure, especially in this kind of scenario where words are no longer effective at times. But just from my own experience and observation, I think we can see that sounds of reflective or non-intrusive types of music can lift a heavy mood in the environment of the room that often accompanies the pain of hopelessness. So it's about coming to a place of surrender and letting go, and of coming to a place of openness and trust. And the question here that might be part of our reflection for someone who's dealing with this might be, what challenge are you facing that you fear might require more strength than you have? It's a very interesting one. What challenge are you facing that you fear might require more strength than you have? Next slide, please. As we encounter our patients and their families, what we listen for and try to understand is where the taproot, you could say, the taproot of suffering is for that person. Where would we say the taproot of suffering is for that person from these 4 dimensions that we briefly touched on? What seems to be the primary area of pain? Emphasized in our response to a person's expression of pain is the power of bearing witness to that without compassion, rather than, or with compassion rather than judgment, with compassion rather than judgment, with empathetic support and presence rather than fixing or trying to move someone out of their darkness or wilderness experience. Some of you may have benefited from the work of Dr. Alan Wolfelt, and that he's a grief and bereavement counselor and writer. And that's really stuck with me, this idea of a companion goes with you. They don't try to pull you back and make you get through that. They go with you through that. And so there can be a hopeful possibility of healing and transformation for people within their pain and difficulty and liminal experience. But that's probably going to be more likely when there's someone who companions with them like that, with compassion rather than judgment. So next slide. How are we doing for the time? Ooh, the time is flying. Ooh, okay, I got to wrap up here. So this is the last slide. Care has no recipe. It's a quote from an author that I like, Arthur Frank. You can have a look at that. He reminds us that no matter how many people we have seen or cared for, each one is unique from another and from our own experience. And it's also humbling as a reminder that we make use of different tools and approaches to caring for psychospiritual needs. So I'm going to hand this over now to Sheila. Sorry, Sheila, I really lost track of the time there. But she's going to move us through some more of the language of reflection.
There we go. Thanks, Christine. I'm learning as I listen to you. I know I looked at your slides and your content, but as you speak it, it's speaking into some different corners of practice and also of experience. That's really, really helpful. The first part, we've sort of tried to give you some content, somewhat of sort of what might we be listening for or discerning in engagement with people in our care. And the next few slides will try to shift to thinking about how we listen. How do we do that listening? Some varieties of ways that we'll just tap into that. So supporting the existential reflection, supporting the meaning making. And really you can hear that we've already talked about that, but we'll just do a shift of the of the lens to sort of the how. And next slide, please. And so one of the things that I find myself as I move through my life of practice, more particular and more passionate about in these days, I think particularly because I work in a very secular context and description of my role right now. And it matters to me a huge amount that we think about language, that we think about what is the language we use that stretches out and makes as broad as possible the way we engage, or the tools we engage with, as in the language tools, so that people go, oh yeah, that's me. Oh yeah, that's me. I've never thought about this stuff. Now I'm in a crisis. But when you say that, yeah, I do have something that I think about that. So that's kind of my preface to how I think about what might be helpful for all of us in such different roles and angles and places in the care spectrum to be thinking about. So this slide, the slides will talk in different ways about language and then the sort of the ideas. In this slide, I'm thinking about language for spirituality. So this is kind of a little bit like a glossary of terms. It's like stretching out and unpacking some of the words we use in spiritual care or in our conversations. So the language of meaning making. Christine's used that language lots in the first part of the presentation. When I'm trying to unpack even the word meaning making, because it's a little bit of insider language, I think about how we try to make sense of things. So that might be a way I stretch that out for somebody I'm speaking with. I might not say, how is your meaning making? But I might say, how are you trying to make sense of things right now? Purpose, struggle, those are kind of words we might hear, or words we might use. Those are common language as well. The language of mystery is something I might use. I might also be listening for. And so when I say, well, what's mystery? For some people, they go, yeah, mystery or mystical experience, they understand that. But that may not be language for some people. So this idea of the invisible things that we can't explain. So somebody might say, yeah, I thought I was dying. I heard my dad's voice. And they may not have a spirituality kind of glossary or language or frame that they're putting that in, but they go, oh, it's that kind of an experience. I don't know. Was that real? Did it happen? So that idea of the invisible things that we can't explain. Maybe I might use that language. Sometimes people have these experiences they can't explain. Do you ever have those? So there's just an example of using that. Our way of looking at life, our set of beliefs or guidelines, our philosophy of life. I found that as I was working in previously in a community spiritual care position, I wanted to not start with the language that sounds like, oh yeah, that's the language of religious people, and that's not what I am. And people differentiate themselves. So I don't start with the language of beliefs. I might say, do you have like a way of looking at life that you think about when you think about the big stuff or the hard stuff? Is there something that kind of gives you some wisdom or gives you something to hold on to? Is there a favorite quote? Is there something that tells you? And then if they share that, I might learn a huge amount about what is their spiritual style. And then this idea of the existential themes, again, we use that language in this presentation. I think about that as the beyond us themes. So do you have something outside of yourself, something beyond yourself that you reference or that you think about or you look towards or you pull on, draw on? And so there's just some sample ideas in a quick run through. Next slide, please. I included this slide. This is very, very specific. I work with grieving parents. Either children are in life-limiting illness and they are towards dying, or they have died, and we particularly, our program supports the parents in a long process of grief. And I noticed when we decided to try a grief and spirituality session, I thought to myself, how do we kind of give some anchor points around some of the themes that come up a lot? So one of the themes that comes up often, and I bet it comes up with any of the people you work with as well, if you're in the grief part of palliative care, is this idea of next place or reunion or reconnection with their person with their child. So if I'm in a really broad context, I want to begin with really broad language. I don't necessarily introduce these kinds of ideas, but when they naturally come up, then people may or may not have, they say, well, I don't believe in a next place, but I kind of wish I did, because then I would. And so there's a whole piece, if you're in therapeutic work, there's a whole piece of material there that you might then reflect back from that reflecting pool. So it sounds like if you did believe in something, what would that look like? So that, and then that can go on a pathway. So this, I just gave some examples here because I had worked on this to try and do for a very broad, mixed group in a secular context. There are some different sort of gatherings of ideas. So I haven't put religious names or cultural or ethnic sort of cultural names on these. Some of the views that people have about how we think about death are humanist type views. The idea that I don't think of something after, I think that life is here and now. Some of the views that we have are afterlife views. There's a dozen, 100,000 afterlife views. Some of them are people's own personal view. I just know there's a place. That's an afterlife view. I am going to a safe and beautiful place, something like that. There's a journey view, which focuses more on the journey. The soul is going on a journey. Some of the Eastern traditions have more of an emphasis on we need to feed the soul to be ensured that the soul is free to go on its journey, for example, in a ritual. And then there's this is not comprehensive, but another area that I think is very common in contemporary people who maybe haven't a particular way is this idea of an agnostic view. Agnostic doesn't mean I don't believe, it means I don't know. Ag is not, and Gnostic is about knowing. So agnostic view says, I don't know. So I don't know could lead to curiosity. It could lead to wondering. I wonder if there's a place. I think I'm going to hold on to that because that's what I need so I can survive this awful loss. So that's just, and you can go ahead to the next slide, but just some examples of the way of using broad language in a particular theme. And this next one, I'm going to just give you quickly. So spiritual themes in broad secular language. Again, another example of it. Voices you might hear from a patient, a client, a family member, a staff colleague who's going, oh my gosh, like this just seems so awful, so violent, so bad, so unfair, that kind of moral distress. Why is this happening? What does this mean? What matters most to me? So those could be voices coming from somebody you might be supporting. Voices, ways of phrasing that we might use speaking to somebody. So you can say, do you have a religion? Do you have a faith? Do you have a this? And that's a yes, no. It's like a toggle answer. Yes, no. So if it's no, then I've kind of created a dead end. So here's some two examples. What holds everything together for you and your family? What is there something at the center? Is there something you guys kind of hold high? And people may say it's the love at the center of our family. We share these beliefs or we share these values. We always give to other people who are in need. That may be the core of their personal spirituality or their family spirituality. And that may be something that serves them. And then the other example here is, are there this is thinking about end of life, closer to end of life. Are there some important words that you need to have someone say when your person dies? Or if you're speaking to the person when you die, are there some important words that you need to hear? Words of love, words of gratitude, words of sending, words of, got my chat in the way, words of committing her or him into safekeeping, words of sending him on his journey to the next place. So you can see how I've taken that kind of general, broad spiritual language and offered some possibilities. We often say, do you need spiritual care? Do you need somebody to give you last rites, give you whatever? Those are very particular things for just certain people in certain traditions. But there's some broad possibilities of how we might create an open frame where they say, oh, well, yeah, I'd love someone to say that kind of thing to me. And next slide, please. So this is, I'm going to just run this through. This is thinking about the listening. And so we've talked about that deep listening, active listening, active reflection of what we're hearing when we listen. If we assume we're all spiritual beings, we have spiritual needs, we may not ever have named them. We may often not have named them until we come to a crisis or a crossroads where we thought the road went through, but it doesn't. And so how will we understand the spiritual needs of our patients and clients? We will listen for language that is about meaning, wondering, making sense of things. We will listen for language that is about emotional pain, spiritual pain, purpose, passion, values, about connection or disconnection, loss of connection. We'll listen for spiritual or religious language, because in going broad, we don't want to forget that for some people, that is their vocabulary. That is their total vocabulary. I can see my great aunt, I see Mary, I can hear the words, I can see the light, and I know I'm okay. And we're listening also for that language, or contemporary spiritual language. And then we're reading the room. This is something that's part of our foundational spiritual care training. Do not say anything, read the room when you walk through that door. So reading the room, watching for symbols of a person's spirituality or spiritual identity or spiritual distress. And remember, you're looking broadly, so you may see across a Quran, something that is very explicit, but you don't know what the meaning of that is. So again, we're reading with curiosity and inquisitiveness. Maybe somebody brought a Bible and put it on the table because that was their gesture of care. But also we're looking for what's the book they're reading, or what's the quote that they've put on their wall, or what are the photos around? Is family the circle of their spirituality, that kind of thing. And I'm going to skip the next slide. When you receive the slides, you'll see it's just another example of some other kinds of questions that we might use if we're exploring with people. So we can move on from that one. And we're just going to go briefly into a case. Where are we at? 10 to. So this is from a very, very simple, this is not a big, long, complicated case. It's an example from when I worked previously, a few jobs ago, in an adult hospice setting. I was asked to go see a woman who was in our residential hospice. She was had come there for the end of her life. And in very simple terms, I described my role. I said emotional and spiritual support. Sometimes people like me to just listen if they have a question or they're doing wondering about getting ready for dying. And would you like me to stay, or would you like to just know that I'm here? That's some of the things that are often part of that. And she was very quiet, but awake and was attending. And she turned towards me and said, "Is there really a light?" And that is all she said to me. And I paused, I held her question, and I did some things. But we're going to use this before I tell you all the things that I might think about. I want you to, first of all, imagine yourself hearing that question. Maybe something about you made somebody ask that question of you. Maybe they know that you have a spiritual practice. Maybe you've talked before. But when you hear that question, what does that do inside of you? And just, you can put some things in the chat. I'm sorry, I can't watch it all, but you can put some things in there, but mostly just think inside yourself. What does it feel like to be asked the question, is there really a light? And then the next points we'll just go through. Thank you very much. Master control. So what comes to mind? What does the question mean? What do you think that the question means? What does it possibly tell you about her spirituality? And think of wheels with spokes that don't have a rim. Okay, so think in spray, in big possibilities. There might be 5 different things you think of about that. What does it tell you about her preparation for death? So those are just, and again, I realize with these 1-hour type presentations, you please take this as a tool. Please take it and contemplate it, or take it to your next situation where someone poses a question and you think, whoop, what will I do with that? So I'd like you to imagine yourself in the context of the question, but then also think, first of all, so remember I said read the room. So first, before I even think about the question, I want to think, where am I? Who am I with? Being aware of the setting. She is lying in bed. She has very low energy, as I observe. There's not much eye contact, and it's a dark room. And so when I think about the question, I don't think, ooh, well, I better figure out who she is and what she believes in, what she doesn't believe in, and should I give her this answer or that answer? Because we're talking about a question that probably all the energy just needs to go into attending and giving her back her question, in a sense. So we've talked about these different questions. I'll just go back to a few of them and say that, so for instance, what does it tell you about her or her spirituality? To me, it tells me that there is room for symbolic meaning. Seeing a light, like there's something there that she's heard of or she's aware of. Maybe she's had an experience before. There's room for mystery. There's room for wondering. Maybe, and again, from my lens, I think there's maybe a sense of journey or of a something that's ahead. So you remember I gave you that list. Some people don't think of something next. But in this question, I'm hearing, oh, she's thinking ahead. She's looking to something. What does it tell you about her preparation for death? I think about she's been wondering. She's been reflecting. Maybe she knows about near-death experiences. Maybe somebody said, once I saw the light. And then the final slide, and I really would like to now have you open up for a question. I'm just going to offer you this. So this slide was about how do we listen to that question? And then the next one, thank you, is one which I titled How We Respond. And when we're responding, we can often tend to get a little zip of anxiety that makes us want to answer, want to give something in response to a question. So you might think, what did that do when I said to you, what does that question do to you? And I apologize, I'm summarizing here just to be sure to get some breath and then have a few minutes for some question. But anxiety, uncertainty, adrenaline, a sense of awe, a sense of excitement. Oh gosh, yeah, I love this question. But is it about her? How do I keep the response being about her? I can answer a question. I can acknowledge or validate the question. So part of my response was, that's a deep question, in the best that I remember what I said to her. But the other thing I did in terms of when you say validate is I said, some people, so I referenced other people's experience. I don't know if there's a light or not. I said, some people tell me that there is a light. And then I did this, which I do as again, referencing others' experience. And if you see it, it's okay to follow it. So I didn't tell her whether there is or isn't a light because I don't know. And that belongs to many different frameworks. Many people may or may not think about a light. The idea that there's something I can do if I see it, I've learned from other people and other people's experiences, and from wisdom of spiritual care about the language of how do we guide and accompany. Some people might not say that because that doesn't feel like it's part of their scope or their realm, but they might say, I have heard people talk about the light. what is it you're thinking about? So taking it back to her. I just am going to squeeze those notes shut at the end. And again, you'll get this, but please, if there's any questions that have been posed, somebody can sort of pick those out. And I see Peter's got some wisdoms in there. So let me just bring my quote up. Diana, do you want to just facilitate what might have happened that
Certainly.
I didn't notice
Certainly,
there?
you did not miss any questions so far, but I do invite anybody in the session, please raise your hand or feel free to unmute and share anything if you'd like. I do not see any questions at the moment in the chat, but you're more than welcome to share any thoughts with us. So if you'd like to add anything at the moment. Peter did indicate you've had a difficult time of struggles, and I wonder if you experience this as dark times. If so,
Oh.
is there ever a time when darkness lessens or disappears? What that's like to see a difference from the darkness?
Thank you, Peter.
All right. Well, I do not see any other questions, but I think what has happened, Sheila and Christine, is people are extremely deep within reflection following this session, which I thought I'm blown away. I'm in some very serious reflection on my end as well. We have sent a survey link here in the chat for you, and we'd really appreciate if you let us know what you think about this session. A recording of the session will be emailed to all registrants within the next week. We'd like to thank you so much for your participation, and we look forward to seeing you at our next session. We will be sharing the slide deck as well. We have a few of the resources as well that we've shared, so that will be in the follow-up email. Thank you so much, everyone.